Over the removal of old apartheid and other statues has yet not faded away. Now the city of Tshwane and AfriForum are clashing over the change of street names. The High Court in Pretoria has ordered the Metro to restore the use of both new and old names until a ruling is made by the Supreme Court of Appeal next year. The Metro had removed old street names, but civil rights group AfriForum took them to court and won. If the city adhered to the order by Judge Eben Jordaan, both the old and the new street names would appear on street signs by August this year. But the city is adamant it would not budge on the issue. It's the second time that the street name saga has gone to court, or to the appeals court. Both the city of Tshwane and AfriForum are joining us today to talk about the matter. Now, joining us here in studio is representing civil rights group AfriForum is Werner Human, and then from Pretoria, live in our Pretoria studio, is a member of the Mayoral Committee for Economic Development and Planning, Cllr Subesh Pillay. Very good morning to you, Cllr Pillay.
Good morning, Eben.
If I can start with you, Cllr Pillay, it's been toing and froing and in and out of the courts. Just give us your opening remarks on the entire issue.
Well, I think even when we started the name change process, we were clear that this process has to build an inclusive city. And if you look at the permutation of the final 25 names, we had gone to great length to ensure that the completeness of the history of our city is reflected in those 25 names, including the two names being Pretoria Street and Paul Kruger Street, which were retained when we did the street name changes. So we just believe that the toing and froing in courts is simply a smokescreen that seeks to prevent the transformation of our city. We will continue to challenge that matter in the courts, but we remain resilient in our conviction that this capital city has to represent the people of our country and the completeness of its history.
Mr. Human, if I can get your response to that.
Yes, sure. What the MMC, the issue of the court application is separate from the issue that MMC is raising. The issue of the court application, firstly, we need to draw a distinction that there are two applications here. The first one is review action, and this focus on procedure. According to our client, there's been numerous procedures not followed, which includes the Municipal Finance Management Act, the National Geographic Guidelines, and also the public participation process. When we lodged the application, we requested from the city to provide us with an undertaking not to remove the old street names so that they can be properly adjudicated upon. They did not adhere to the request, and in fact, they expedited the process, which necessitated an urgent application. So that what happened 2 weeks ago is actually interim relief granted to our client 2 years ago. So the issue of inclusive names is not actually the same when we're talking about due procedure that must be followed. AfriForum's position on name change is quite simple. Names have meaning to different people in society, and we need to build an inclusive society. But we need to have the due process followed in this regard.
In South Africa, if I pick up the newspapers and I go online, I am told constantly that we are a nation divided and at peril, at war with each other. How do we find each other, Mr. Human? How do we build this inclusive, multicultural, multiracial society where we can be at peace with ourselves? How do we do that?
I believe a step in the right direction would be if interest groups like us, AfriForum, the executive as the city, sit around a table and negotiate. We don't want to go to court. We don't want to fight over this in courts. That's why when we requested the undertaking, we requested from the city, let's have a negotiated settlement, let's sit around the table and talk about these issues. No doubt there will be some names that we will agree to have been removed. But there are some names which we want to remain. And we can repeat this after this morning here. We will go for a negotiated settlement, to sit around the table and discuss issues. I think that's the way forward. The parties to sit and discuss a mutually beneficial situation.
Cllr Pillay, now you've been handed 60 days to restore old and new names. What are you going to do, especially in light of what you're hearing now from the protagonists within the discussion? What are you going to do?
Well, let me just make the point that your guest there says this thing must come about as a result of a negotiated settlement. I think let's put it on record that the executive mayor led an intense round of negotiations, amongst others with AfriForum, which is what resulted in the retention of two of the names being, as I said, Paul Kruger and Pretoria Street. So it's in fact not true that this has happened without any consultation. As I say, we've been engaging a whole range of stakeholders, particularly AfriForum in that instance. Now, on the matter of the court, the city reserved its rights. We're currently consulting our legal team. We appear poised at this stage, based on the preliminary advice, to take the decision of the Gauteng North High Court on review to the appeals court in Bloemfontein.
Again, it seems like the city at that time was pushing to have the names removed quite expeditiously. The discussions with AfriForum was not done, and I can say with confidence that even in the judgments, the first judgment, the urgent application, as well as the one for the appeal, stated that there still had been discussions when the city went forth and just very expeditiously removed the names.
What do you say to that, Councillor Pillay?
Well, even again, we had, apart from the consultation with stakeholders and so on, we followed a formal process that's provided for in terms of the policy that regulates street names in the city. That decision culminated in a full resolution or full sitting of council supporting the resolution to proceed with the street name changes. We had included in that recommendation to council, which, as I say, was finally resolved, that the dual names would appear for a period of time. And in our considered opinion, 6 months would have been a reasonable period. Now, remember, the dual names was not part of, it was simply to ensure that the transition happens in a smooth way and that people who move about in the city don't get confused by the new and old names. So it could not have been conceivably that it remains perpetually the dual names. And that's why we believe that a period of 6 months was sufficient to allow the transition to happen. The entire mapping system had been changed. People had become used to the new street names, and life has gone on in the city. I mean, there were screaming headlines about 1.something billion rands, the cost of all of this, and none of that has actually materialized. In fact, South Africans have accepted these names, and people have gone about their daily lives almost business as usual, and the street names have become a part of life in the city of Tshwane. And we quite frankly don't understand the posture of AfriForum to continue to want to draw the Afrikaner community into a lager and almost isolate the Afrikaner community. That's not the intention. The Afrikaner community have a place in our city as they do in our country, and we want to relate that history in the completeness of how our public signals, our street name, our public art gets reflected and espoused in the city.
Pulling the Afrikaner nation into a lager in a country where it seems we are constantly angry and at war with ourselves?
That's simply not the case. What the MMC missed there in the entire outset of what had transpired, there already had been a review action lodged. It's just proper practice when a review action is lost that the status quo remained for the proper adjudication. Even the judges said in the judgment that there are certain court procedures there that need to be followed, and they denied that.
How do we give this a human face? How do we find humanity? How do we find each other? How do you want to find the city?
I would again suggest that the negotiations, or at least discussions, be open upon this. We do not think that the process has been completely followed. We do not believe that the consultations can be completely done. So there's still room for that. And again, the city want to persist to go litigate again.
Your response to that, and then tell us about costs and costs incurred, Councillor, and then who will pick up the legal costs eventually.
Okay. So let's just reflect on the legal process. Remember that the initial application was an urgent motion brought about by AfriForum to interdict the city from proceeding with the street name changes. The urgent motion was denied, and the matter was set down on the ordinary court rolls, which is what is now what is now going to happen or be heard by the courts. Parallel to that, let me make the point: the court made no determination as to the dual names when that urgent motion was declined, and then the city proceeded in terms of its own decision. Now, remember that the council is a legislative body, and its decisions carries the full weight of a legislative body. So when the council resolves, it can't be by way of administrative action that somebody in the city decides that we are going to negate or not execute a council decision. And consistent with that decision, the administration proceeded after a period of 6 months to change the street names. At that point, AfriForum went back, now simply to seek an interdictory order to prevent the city from removing the dual names, which is what 2 years later the courts have now pronounced on. So that is where we are. As I say, In terms of the cost, we had said it before the name changes, we had said it during the process, and I think the period of the past 2 years has vindicated us that there is no 1-odd billion rands that the screaming headlines were reflecting, that in fact, the cost, yes, there was a cost, something at the time we estimated in order of about 2.5 million rands, but for the rest of it, it was the operational cost that would have otherwise gone into replacing street names over a period of time, and incrementally we've gone through that process. So, as I say, if you look at business in the city, they've come to terms, they've changed their letterheads, their business cards, the GIS mapping systems have all changed, the street names are now recorded on the mapping systems, and all of that life has simply gone on. AfriForum remains convinced in their conviction that the Afrikaner community has to be drawn back and treated differently.
Councillor, thank you for joining us today. I gave you the first word today. I'm going to give AfriForum the last word. You've got about 45 seconds to wrap up your response.
Well, AfriForum believes in positive negotiation and discussions between various parties. We do believe that there's some all street names we do have a place in the new dispensation. And the following statement I say with the utmost sensitivity, but not all names that predate 1994 need to have a struggle connection to be legitimate names in South Africa. There are names, for example, Queen Wilhelmina, who is the Queen of England, who criticized the British during the Boer War and were against British imperialism. She, we believe, has a place in the city.
Well, I thank you for joining us. All I can say is that I hope we find each other. In South Africa, we need to find each other. You know, it looks at times as if we can be so far divided over the smallest of little issues. It's a very delicate time in our country right now. Let's all try and make a contribution to our nation. I thank you once again for joining us, and also to the good councillor joining us live from the capital there this morning. Now,